Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second episode of Speaker Stories Season 2. I'd like to welcome you once again. Glad you could join us on this lovely Thursday evening. My name is Spencer. I'm going to be your Chewie for the evening, your co-pilot, if you will. And I am proud to introduce our host with the most, Mr. Notman. John, how are you tonight?
I'm very good. I'm very excited to introduce all of our members to this evening's guest. For me, I've met this gentleman in person, and I just think he's absolutely wonderful. For me, he's part of Star Wars lore and many other things as well, and just a true gentleman and a great friend to this specific speaker series. So. Without further ado, I want to introduce you, for those of you that don't know, to Nick Maley. This is Nick. Nick, just a little bit about Nick before we get to know him a little bit better. Nick is well known as a creature effects artist and special effects makeup artist. He's worked on 53 movies, including movies such as The Man with a Golden Gun, which is a James Bond movie, Superman 1 and 2, The Shining, Bridge Too Far, Krull, Life Force. I could go on for quite some time. This gentleman has been in the movie industry for a very, very long time and has worked on some wonderful productions. Nick is most notably known, I would say, for his work on the original Star Wars movie and The Empire Strikes Back as part of Stuart Freeborn's team. And last year, Nick did an outstanding presentation on his work with Yoda. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But, you know, Nick worked closely with Stuart Freeborn's team on those two movies and has, you know, given some wonderful memories and experiences of his time in that part of his career. So originally from London, Nick and his wife, Gloria, retired to the Caribbean, specifically Saint Martin, and opened a museum and exhibit specifically of his work. Nick is known all over the world, not just in the Caribbean, as that Yoda guy, whose work, as I mentioned a minute ago, on Yoda during the production of The Empire Strikes Back. And people who visit the island flock to his exhibit, his museum. I've seen it in person. It's outstanding. It's such a wonderful place to visit. And we'll talk more about that later. But tonight, Nick is actually going to talk to us and discuss with us about his work on the original Mos Eisley Cantina creatures and his experience and memories of that particular production. We felt that, seeing as we call this the virtual Cantina speaker series, there was nothing better than for Nick to talk about his work in that respect. So I will close at that point and let Nick introduce himself and talk us through what he's going to talk to us about this evening. Over to you, Nick. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I'm not sure if I'm on screen yet because I can't really tell with with Zoom. I'm going to talk to you, basically give you an overview of how the Mos Eisley Cantina came together and the way that it was, how that movie was at that point in time. There's a great documentary that you might want to try and find online called The Galaxy Britain Built, because all the principal photography was done in England. But what's really nice about that is it explains how they were really struggling for money when they were making the first Star Wars, and how everybody really didn't know how we were going to achieve what we needed to achieve within the framework of that budget. So I'm going to focus today on Mos Eisley because there's a lot to know, and we don't want to have this thing end up being 3 hours. So I'm going to start to share my screen with you on my this is a presentation that I would normally do at conventions, etc. And I always struggle to try and, if I go flat out, I can just about squeeze it in an hour and steal a bit. But here we go. So let's just take a moment. So everybody, thank you for waiting. Thank you for whatever it was doing, fixing the knitting or watching ads on the TV while you were waiting for us to catch up, watching YouTube or whatever it is. I'm talking about YouTube, you know, our channel on YouTube, we release videos pretty much every week that are largely about Star Wars. Sometimes I do long interviews with what I would call in-depth interviews with other movie personalities, but we also do quite a lot of 5 to 15-minute videos that I release on a Saturday. This coming Saturday is going to be about the Mos Eisley Cantina, in fact, so that's kind of interesting. YouTube channel, if you just go to YouTube and look up Nick Maley, you'll find me. So anyway, let's get on with this. This is life in the Mos Eisley Cantina. You know, the first thing that we need to talk about, and those of you who are real aficionados will know some of this stuff, so forgive me if I'm repeating stuff that you already know. But the first issue is that there are actually 3 cantinas in A New Hope. When people think about Star Wars and they think about the cantina, they think about Tunisia. This is where everybody goes in order to commune with the movies, but actually there wasn't any of this, and none of the interior of the Mos Eisley Cantina was filmed in Tunisia. Only the exteriors as they arrived and had a conversation with the stormtroopers and walked to the buildings, and then it's a wrap and everybody got on a plane and went to England instead. Others, and the main one was in England. The principal photography was filmed in Elstree Studios, in the outskirts of London. Elstree Studios was at that time not the biggest of studios, but they managed to do a great deal. My friend Robert Watts, who was really effectively the line producer on that, managed to do a deal to get the entire studio for the entire filming of Star Wars for £75,000, which was an absolute steal, really, at that point in time. Especially, they paid more than that to Alec Guinness. So, you know, it was an interesting thing. There's a red line in the middle of this. You can see my cursor running up and down against it. That's actually where they cut the studio in half, and all of the stuff on the right-hand side was turned into a car park and a supermarket. And so the studio became just this little bit on the outside here. The Lucasfilm set, which is this big set at the very back next to the tank, that was actually where we filmed Dagobah. They obviously didn't want to give that up to the supermarket, so they took it apart and moved it and put it in this area over here, which was confusing. When I was there in 2015, I couldn't figure out, you know, my bearings for a while, because the soundstage was there, but it wasn't where but the other buildings weren't where I expected it to be in relationship. At that point in time, we had a little room, and it was in this little corner building over here. Try to follow my cursor if you can. It was just about the size of the bit that I'm marking with my cursor there, and there were 6 of us in there building creatures for the Mos Eisley Cantina. It was kind of interesting, because although in 1976 we had the hottest summer on record at that point in time, I joined this movie in March, I think March the 12th, and on March the 11th it snowed. And so my first day in the studio was kind of wading through 6 inches of snow to get into this area that was called the old school room. I'm going to just just move on through some of these slides here for you. This actually shows you the area that I was just talking about. This is where we were. In fact, where we built Yoda was a much bigger workshop in this area down here. All of this has been ripped down now and turned into a car park and a supermarket, which I think is a real shame, but such is life. You can see my contract here. It's March the 8th. So I got my days wrong. So 7th must have been when it snowed. Let me see. Oh yeah, this is the bottom of my contract. People say to me, oh, you made Star Wars, you must be rich. Well, you know, we worked on this particular sequence for 5 weeks, including filming it, and they paid me £65 a week. So I guess if you convert that to US, I made about $900 out of that first Star Wars. They sets were, you know, designed just like this, where they make a little cardboard cutout to try and figure out, you know, what they're going to have to make to be able to film that, and how the walls, you know, can be moved out for individual shots. We had these guys that none of us had of. Carrie Fisher, okay, she was Debbie Reynolds' daughter, so she was kind of Hollywood royalty. I mean, she grew up in that environment as a privileged kid, and so she, I think at the time, was about 18, and she was the boldest of the three. No one was going to tell her what she should or shouldn't be doing. She was a very strong-willed girl at that time. George Lucas, well, you know, look at him with his arms folded there. You know, he was just a young American that people said was going to be a big thing, whether he would or not. I mean, I remember doing something with Dennis Waterman, and everybody said he was going to be the new Marlon Brando, and then he disappeared until he showed up in Law and Order 30 years later. So, you know, you never know how this will work out. Mark Hamill, none of us knew him, but he was actually the most experienced actor of the three. Well, I say experienced, he had the bigger reputation of the three. And Harrison Ford, who was a kind of quiet guy, was most likely going to be just sitting there reading a book most of the time. People always think that Harrison would be the life and soul of the party. He really wasn't. Life and soul of the party was Mark Hamill. Very funny guy, nice personality, always upbeat, always fun to be around. Anyway, so here you can see from the look on her face, she's just you know, she was a diva right from the start, and Mark was always joking and having fun. Here you've got a real mixture of the cast. You got Harrison Ford. You can see what a happy soul he was that day, and that was kind of typical of him at that time. He wasn't this smiling guy most of the time. While he was getting his makeup done and the other stuff, he was kind of quiet and rather serious. Dave Prowse, who played Darth Vader, credited on all the posters as playing Darth Vader. James Earl Jones didn't get a credit in the first two movies. It wasn't until Return of the Jedi that he got a screen credit. The tallest, of course, being Peter Mayhew. I helped recommend him for that job. Me and the production supervisor, Pat Carr, both worked with him on Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and we both recommended him for Chewbacca. And you know, these three managed to make Mark look like he's you know, a wayward 12-year-old, let alone you know, Carrie and Kenny Baker, who's R2-D2. George Lucas, as I say, was not this esteemed filmmaker that you know today. He was just a young guy that we were told was going to be a big thing. We were just happy to be working. It didn't really matter who was in charge. We just wanted the work. We wanted the reputation. We were going to give everything that we could to whatever the project was, because the next job is always dependent on this job, and so you want to do everything you can. You can see the seasoned performer, Alec Guinness, who really was at that time. We weren't impressed to be working with George Lucas. We were impressed to be working with Alec Guinness and Donald Pleasance. And in fact, Alec's agent didn't really feel that he should be in this movie for a couple of different reasons. First of all, because it was science fiction, and the one thing that everybody thought of as a B movie at that time was anything that was science fiction. You know, they were still living with memories of The Blob and Roger Corman movies that were all low budget kind of movies. And so Alec had this huge reputation and a huge amount of movies that he had previously done. And his agent said, but you're only offering him a small part. And, you know, it's a science fiction. It's probably a B movie. Why the hell would you want to do it, right? And this comes from a conversation that I had with Peter Beale, who was the executive in charge of production and the managing director of 20th Century Fox, that I had on for some of my discussions a few weeks ago. So first of all, they managed to get him on because they offered him, you know, a significant pay day for it. But you know, I think this photograph is great because it really shows that look on his face, as if to say, what the hell have I got myself into, really? Because you know, this is a movie about gunslingers and wizards in space in 1976, and no one was going to take that seriously. I mean, it was like, yes, thank you very much for the job, we'll give it everything we can, but this must be something for kids or whatever else. None of us expected it to be the movie that ultimately it became. This is kind of interesting. It's the contract where George Lucas swapped 1% of Star Wars with Steven Spielberg for 1% of Close Encounters. Basically, you know, neither one was sure that their movie was going to be a success, so they kind of covered their bets by you know, by swapping 1% each. I have to tell you, when I saw both movies, I was really disappointed I hadn't worked on Close Encounters. I thought it was a great movie, but ultimately there's no doubt that Steven Spielberg did better out of this deal than George Lucas did. Let's talk about my boss, Stuart Freeborn. Here you can see Stuart when he's pretty much in his late 80s, early 90s, where he's become a frail old chap who would go and do various talks like the one that we're doing now, and would do conventions and various other things. And so most people today remember him as a kind of cuddly guy. But, you know, in his day, he wasn't that at all. He was like a little British bulldog. He was a small guy. I mean, I'm short and he made me look tall. And he ran his department like a headmaster. So you always felt you were sitting an exam and you weren't quite sure whether you were going to pass or whether you're going to fail. And here you can see me, we're doing a life cast here, where we were taking doing a full head cast that we're taking off. He and the family were really at the top of the tree in England at the time. having done 2001: A Space Odyssey. He had been known for a long while for doing character makeups. He would do movies with Alec Guinness where he played 6 different characters. He did the same thing with Peter Sellers. He did Dr. Strangelove. It was one of the movies where he did that. So he was known for that. But then when we got to 2001: A Space Odyssey, suddenly he started to introduce ideas of animatronics, as it later became known, and would have been better known as soft mechanics, really. Maybe I'll explain that to you another time, or maybe we'll get to it. But because actually what we were building didn't have any electronics in it at all. And now people, when you use the word animatronics, all they hear is tronics. And so they instantly rush out to the radio control shop and buy a bunch of servos, when actually you get stuff that's much more believable if you can leave the motors out altogether. But that's another story. So here you can see him with his wife, Kay. Kay was really a makeup artist. She didn't really do a lot in the workshop. She would come in when we were really hard pushed. At the very end of the Mos Eisley Cantina, she came in to do some of the painting, literally in the last few days before filming. But most of the time she'd be on set looking after Carrie or some of the other stars. Graham, that you see here, is an unsung hero of Star Wars. I think I talked about him when I was talking before. He basically sculpted half the characters that are in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Stuart was working on Chewbacca, and Graham basically sculpted most of the others, from suggestions that Stuart made about what might be a good starting point. Here you can see Kay working on Peter Cushing. Here you can see her working in the workshop, but this is a setup for publicity photos. It was very rare for her to actually be there. And then lastly, there was me. I was the new kid on the block. I had actually spent 2 years, actually more than that. I first worked with Stuart in 1971, so it had been another 4 years that I was trying to get onto his creature effect team. He had done a movie. I did a movie with him about Winston Churchill when he was young, and I did 16 weeks on that, but as a character makeup, 2-dimensional makeup artist, and so I wanted to get onto this team. And I had actually done a commercial with Graham that was all horror characters in a bar. It was a Donald Pleasance in a bar drinking lager with Frankenstein and the Mummy and a bunch of other characters. And so it was that encouraged Graham to push his dad to include me on that team. So I'm always grateful to Graham for that. You can see me here with characters, and I'm just looking at this, but Graham sculpted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of these 11 characters. He deserves the credit and is hardly mentioned in the Lucasfilm archive. So anyway, I explained to you that it snowed the day before. It's 7th of March. It snowed. I had joined on the 8th of March, and we were trying to get everything ready to get into the Cantina on the 13th of April. So we just sculpted whatever we could to fill the room with as much stuff as possible. I think I'm jumping around a little bit here. I think I've got a slide later on, which is a slide everybody knows of the Cantina characters and their costumes, which everybody assumes is a design for those characters, which it isn't. It just tells you what costume goes with what head. And the heads and the costumes have been devised really separately. So we had about 4 weeks to create all the creatures for the Mos Eisley Cantina. We used whatever we already had lying around, like hands from 2001: A Space Odyssey and other things, and just ourselves at it. Here you can see a call sheet for that first day. It's kind of interesting when you look at the list here of people. You see, you know, these characters that were deformed, we just knew as the Uglies. They didn't have any names. They were bartender. Greedo was alien. 3P, it was only our main characters, 3PO, R2 and Chewbacca, that were actually named. I mean, we even had people, you know, playing Flash Gordon. We had Declan there playing Jabba the Hutt, who got, you know, moved out and changed later on down the line. So you can see here Ted Burnett, who plays the barman. When you look at him, you understand that he actually didn't need that much makeup. He did have prosthetics on, but not a lot. If I look at that, you can see he's got collodion scar here. I'm not sure whether it looks like that could have been a prosthetic. It's not a very good one. And he had prosthetics on his mouth to try and, you know, twist his mouth around, and makeup for the eyes and whatever else. But, you know, he was, I think as we were filming, some of these came off anyway, because he looked more and more like he did without. These prosthetics were sculpted by Charlie Parker, or Charles Parker as he preferred, but everybody called him Charlie, whether he liked it or not. He was a very renowned makeup artist in his own right, who had done things like Lawrence of Arabia and other, you know, big movies. And he came in just to sculpt these characters. Then Graham and I made the molds. I made all the foam prosthetic pieces, and then we shared, you know, applying them. You can see, you know, this one, which is the one that Charlie put on in a number of these shots. It works quite well as a profile. It was, that to me, there wasn't enough, there was too much contrast between the skin tone and the surface detail of the sculpt, but, you know, that's another issue really. This is the one that I did, the smoker at the end of the bar. This was my first on-screen prosthetic, so I was kind of tentative but kind of proud that, you know, this I joined this team as the junior member of the team. I had I mentioned that it snowed. I didn't finish that part of the story, actually. We had this area outside the workshop where we were blowing eyeballs for those characters that you saw previously, these characters that are in this shot. They pretty much all have eyeballs that are made out of gel, lamp gels. And so we would have compressed air and an oven, and we would put the gel in a template and heat it in the oven. And as it got to what we thought was a reasonable temperature, we'd then turn on the air and blow the eyeball. And then afterwards we try and match eyeballs, and we stuck those in. And so the point about it was outside in the snow and nobody else wanted it. So I can, I can say proudly, oh yeah, I made all the eyes for those characters, but it was only because no one else wanted the job, and the space where we put it was actually a concrete bunker that should have had 2 dustbins in it. They'd taken the dustbins out and put this little machine in there instead. But anyway, getting back to where I was. So this was my first prosthetic. You can see we changed the actor fairly reasonably in this particular case. Like all of these, they work better in silhouette and in profile. But there were others. This character that's got a prosthetic nose, and also this one too. I mean, these guys all came from an agency called Uglies, so they were already good candidates for the job. Jeff Moon is the one that I just showed you. He's down as Ugly Human. We knew them as Ugly Human 1 through 5. We didn't have any names for these guys, but it was interesting that at Celebration they had given this character a name which they found out was the wrong name. They'd called the character Little Aunt Beru, and I don't really know why, because it doesn't really look like a lady, but anyway, so they decided they had to change that name. And so I think it was 2018 when they renamed this character, and I'm kind of touched that they made me canon for the Mos Eisley Cantina by naming the character after me, which was kind of nice. It was cool. I was touched. So anyway, we've got a whole mixture of these characters that you can see here. This lady here was actually played Little Aunt Beru. But she also played other characters too. We're all just standing around the bar shooting this stuff, but actually you can see, this is in the days before everyone was so concerned about smoking. People would be around the back of the set, puffing away on their cigarette. You can see they turned the camera over here, and this guy, if you look at the close-up here, he's actually got a cigarette in his hand in the middle of the Mos Eisley Cantina while they're filming. So yeah, these are other local bureaucrats, just because we needed to fill the room up, and we didn't really have enough to do that. Here is that drawing that I was telling you about, which John Mullo had done, where he paired the heads that we were making up with different costumes. And so this was really for the wardrobe department to be able to associate what costumes they were supposed to put on what people. And sometimes you didn't even have the same people inside. We just took different shaped heads. We didn't make these specifically to fit one person. We pulled some spare heads that we had in the workshop, some that were bigger than others, some that were tall and narrow, some that were short and fat, and used those to sculpt these different heads on. And then someone would come in and go, oh, he's got a short fat head, he needs one of these heads, and you'd stick him on. And we made maybe between 3 and 5 of each of these characters, painting them up a little differently to like each of us, if there were 5 different characters, each of us would artwork one of them so that no 2 of them were ever the same. And so, that's how there were multiple Snaggletooths and multiple Crockers and whatever else. There are a couple of characters that were quite different to the others. This being Ponda Baba, and At the time, we called this character Walrus Man, and I think that stuck in a number of toys and various things. He was sculpted by Chris Tucker, the gentleman who's here. Chris went on later on to do Elephant Man, which was probably the thing that he was most famous for. You can see, let me just talk about these hands. You know, this was my first movie with Stu as a creature effects guy. And so he wanted to figure out what I could do and what I couldn't do. He found out pretty quickly that, I was technical enough to be able to blow eyeballs and technical enough to quickly learn how to foam latex and do that kind of work. He wanted to find out whether I could sculpt or whether I didn't. So we were short of hands, and he asked me to sculpt up these sucker hands. But these hands were not sculpted to go on Ponder. They were sculpted to go on this fly creature, which I think was called Sphizit or something pretty similar. And so I sculpted these sucker hands with the idea that, he would stick to a wall and be able to walk up and do those sorts of things. But those hands, because we were shorter hands, we kind of shared them with a bunch of other characters. So you can see here, these are actually the same hands, only I've cut fingers into them to try and make them, a little different, look similar but different. But these are literally the same hands, only I've scissored them and latex surfaced the tops of those. You can see that the multi-eyed blob, as we called this character, also had those hands. And of course, Pondo had those hands. You can see quite clearly, if I point down here, you can see the sucker hand next to the pistol there. Originally, Pondo wasn't supposed to be in this fight. The fight was initially intended to be with the fly and the rodent, with some special action from the grasshopper, which was actually a praying mantis. The praying mantis really didn't work very well, so it wasn't surprising that they took him out. The rodent, you can see in this other picture over here, was very tiny, and it didn't seem to make a lot of sense, that character getting into the middle of the fight. And the fly really would have had trouble delivering dialogue. So they then decided to give the action to the multi-eyed blob. Because he looked very different to all the others. This character actually came from a drawing that George Lucas did in the airport, and he came in with this little circular thing with little blobby eyes, and he was the boss, so we made it, but it really was very static, and there wasn't really much you could do with it. The eyes did move, but ultimately that got changed again. But it's interesting to see that in the novel they stuck to that. It says he found himself confronted with a large squarish monstrosity of multiple eyes and indeterminate origin. And later on it says, whether it was the overdose of booze, the apartment house of wayward eyeballs, was obviously growing agitated. Well, when shit came to shove, that got changed. This character did get used, wandering around in various places, but and there you go. It's someone's got it in the science fiction archive. But ultimately, and there he is again in the background over here, but ultimately it finally came down to one of the uglies and Ponder to have this fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi. This is actually what the next video that we're going to release is all about. It's bloopers in the middle of the Mos Eisley Cantina. You can see very clearly here Ponder standing here with his sucker hand. By now, you've seen it enough times that it's coming to be second nature. When they decided that they were going to cut his arm off, they wanted to have an arm on the floor that they could film next to a pistol, because they wanted to excuse Obi-Wan for cutting his arm off. It wasn't like, oh, Obi-Wan got pissed and he cut the guy's arm off. He's supposed to be a good guy. So it had to be that they were pulling a pistol on him, even though you really didn't see the pistols much in the final cut of the film. And so I made this arm, which you can see on the floor with the pistol. And then afterwards, in post-production, they realized that this big sucker couldn't wrap around the trigger of this pistol. It couldn't even get in the little hole, where a finger is supposed to go to the pistol. And so in post-production, they completely changed the arm for a Wolfman hand. And so for 45 years, fans that this arm completely transforms as soon as it's cut off of Ponder's body. They, at the same time, while they were doing that insert, someone thought it'd be a good idea to cut his head off too, and then they have the option of the two. And they do actually have a shot of the body without with the head missing. But and they put little bladders in here so it would pulse. But there isn't any blood in Star Wars. And besides which, a lightsaber would cauterize the wound, and so you wouldn't have any blood coming out if you see it through someone's flesh with a lightsaber. So that didn't make it into the movie, and I think that was probably good. You can see these three characters. They love to try and find the characters in the Mos Eisley Cantina. These characters are all over the place because every time they move the camera around, they take the people who are on one side of the bar and put them on the other side of the bar. So often they're in three places in the same scene. In these days, there weren't any VHS tapes. No one was thinking that anyone was ever going to sit down and say, oh, hold on a minute, that guy was over there. No one thought that anyone was going to be analyzing all of these photos. We thought that it was just, in fact, at the time, when you're in a hurry to turn over the camera, they would say, don't worry about the background, don't worry about that. If they're looking at that, we're all in trouble. Not realizing that they were going to later on have people like you sitting here analyzing it frame by frame. At the end of the bar, we've got a character that goes out and advises the stormtroopers that there was a fight inside. This is actually Peter Diamond, who was a stunt coordinator, who was there for, to supervise the fight that was taking place. He was also the lead Tusken Raider that shook his gaffy stick around. There's a couple of other things that are really interesting in this scene, like Han Solo's girlfriend. She had quite a significant few moments sitting there with him. She had a section where they were kissing, and there was an end of the scene where he goes out and she gets up and is left on her own, and it finished with her. All of that ended up on the cutting room floor. This girl probably is going around now telling everybody how she was almost a star in Star Wars, and lo and behold, finally she wasn't in the scene at all. That's a shame. That's almost like Biggs. That was a sad story too. So here you go, two local girls, later known as the Tonica Twins. They're not twins at all. They aren't really even that similar. They just have the same makeup and the same hair. The only thing they had in common is they were both tall. I think one was about 6'4" and one was about 6'2", something of that nature. And they were just described as space girls. I mean, these names are not exactly the most inventive, but we're talking about 1976 when science fiction had not reached the pinnacle that it has today. They were in the ugly agency because they were tall, but there was also another agency they had run by the same people, which I think was called something like the Beauty Agency, and they were in that as well because they were not ugly girls. This is how they came to be known as the Tonica Twins. It was because there was an illustrator who, instead of drawing the two girls, decided that it would be quicker and easier if he drew this once and then flipped the image and put it on a second time. And so from that point on, they were known as twins, but they were never intended to be twins. They were just intended to be from the same society or whatever else. Here you've got the Plutonian. This was sculpted by Chris Tucker as well. Of course, you probably already know this, but there was a lot of scrap that was used, aeronautical scrap that was used to try and dress the set as cheaply as possible. Instead of designing everything on paper and then trying to figure out how to make it, they would make the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon out of plywood, and then they bought £15,000 worth of aeronautical junk from the scrapyard and took it apart and built what they could out of that junk. Part of it over here, you can see this is a Rolls-Royce Jet Engine, and these sections that you see the little green arrow pointing at not only became the head of IG-88, but were also the drink dispensers in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Here we've got, what was the name for this character? Weird Girl, yeah, right. This was one that was done by Graham. We were just trying to do anything that filled this room. And so that's what we're doing. It's kind of funny because she spent a lot of her time sitting around knitting out the back of the set when she wasn't needed. This is Pam now. I'm sure she still goes knitting. This was a convention that we were at that had a bar that had been made up to look like the Mos Eisley Cantina. Greedo, Greedo started life as an alien in a Bird's Eye Pea commercial. And these few characters that look so different to all the others were the ones that George was picking out. One of the crew that was there was Robin Grantham. He's in that big photograph that I talk about. Robin was leaving pretty much to go do another movie when I joined. And I'm not 100% sure everything that he did. I'm not 100% sure whether Greedo was sculpted by him or by Graham. Initially he wouldn't have done the underlying frame. It's kind of interesting because I think it was today there was an auction at the prop store where they sold one of the underlying skulls that we used for the Greedo styled characters, which we called the Martians. There were 5 of them. We had glued all kinds of extra things over something that had already existed. So that we could not, so you wouldn't recognize it as being that alien in the Bird's Eye Pea commercial. And George was picking out all of the weird stuff like the multi-eyed blob and Ponder and this character to really to feature. Of course, he was called the Alien. I mentioned that to you already. There were various ideas on how to draw these and what they might wear. And a lot of these characters that Greedo was ended up in Hangar 94. Here you can see what that looked like initially. This is from the Bird's Eye Pea commercial. And so we were taking that, and you can see the underlying shape in there, added this snout. I added some rings that go around the eyes, added these little foghorn things on the top, and added bigger ears. I made all of these warts and the tasseled mohawk in the foam lab, and we glued all of those on. These warts were all glued on one at a time, individually. And now they tell me that they identified the different masks literally by the pattern of the warts, because they can tell, you know, how they differed. Here you can see those warts being applied. This is another one of those publicity photos. Another real embarrassment in the Mos Eisley Cantina, and there were a couple of them, were these hands. We thought these characters were characters, and so someone came up with this this idea that we should sculpt some sucker finger ends and then glue them on washing up gloves, and to then take those and put them on a featured character was a dreadful disaster. You can see the hands right here. As I said, you know, hands were a problem for this sequence because we were focusing on making heads. Look at what's happening to the hands here when he's trying to hold a pistol. I mean, a complete and utter disaster. And so here you can see Paul, who played Greedo in the principal photography, you know, rehearsing with Harrison, but then later on they replaced that and did some insert shots in the third location for the Mos Eisley Cantina, which was insert photography in the USA. And this has become a famous shot now. As you can see, they have a different actor, actually a lady called Maria, who is wearing her little high-heeled shoes here. So, you know, that really sets the character off kind of nicely. So let me just finish this up by pointing something out here. Stu was born in 1914, and his ideas of what aliens might be had gone through the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and really wasn't what we would think of today. And so the things that he would get Graham to sculpt up were what I would call terrestrial creatures. You know, there's a rat character, there was a fly character, there's a, you know, there's a crocodile character. They all tend to be based on, and there was a praying mantis. They're all kind of based on creatures that you would find that, you know, he just thought were kind of weird and interesting. And so when they had finished principal photography, they felt that they needed to, you know, beef all of this up. I'm just showing you here exactly what I'm talking about. You know, a rat creature, you know, a walrus creature, I'm not quite sure what we based that on. You know, a bat creature. They're all very terrestrial. So when they yeah, the crockers too. When they decided that they needed to do inserts, they brought in a new illustrator in Ron Cobb, who designed some of the more way out characters that you see in the Mos Eisley Cantina. And those were never in the Cantina when we were filming. They were only in an alcove that they built, which I'll show you in a minute. So, you know, a number of these characters, like the Crockers, of course, these guys couldn't breathe very well, and these were really extras, and they would tear the jaws off trying to get more air because they felt claustrophobic inside. We actually used to stand there with hair dryers on cold, blowing air into their mouths to make them feel a little more comfortable between shots. Of course, those went on and became, as you can see here, they became Bosk was one of those that was reworked. While we're looking at this, you've got Dengar in the background there. These characters, none of them were really imagined to be anything special at the time. And so Stuart gave me Bosk as a character to create. And so you can see the scarred face that I put on this actor. I think I'm the only person still living that was associated with Bosk. Stuart was working on Chewbacca, as I said, and of course he was in the Mos Eisley Cantina too. So let's just talk about him for a moment. As I said, had done the Minotaur in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and Pat Carr and I recommended him for this part. The mask that was made was based on the mechanisms that Stuart and his team had devised for the apes in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So they had, you know, kind of similar movements. I made the foam skins that you see underneath here. The hair was basically this cowl was created, and then the front part had laid hair on the front to you know, to go around and overlap on that. You can see him actually laying the hair right there. Chewie was 7'6" by the time he was finished, and Kay, as you can see, wasn't 7'6" and would struggle to try and comb his hair for shots. It was kind of cute, really, in a way. The suit itself, the Chewbacca suit, was knotted, individual hair knotted onto a woolen undersuit. People think of this as being like, oh yeah, fur fabric, and you just glue it onto a suit. But Chewbacca's fur moved in a very biological way, because the hairs could actually swivel on the net. It's like a same principle as a good wig, where you use hair lace and knot the hairs individually through the holes in the lace. What they did, and this is not the suit, it's just as an example, they would have a woolen suit like this, not as detailed as this, and then they would knot the hair through the woolen interwoven wool so that it would then hang down. Yeah, I talked about Jabba the Hutt. Well, here he is. Declan was the original Jabba the Hutt. They cut that scene for some reason, and then later on, of course, they were able to do the special edition and add the digital version. But you'll see that because Han is taller than Declan, excuse me, just burping there, he's looking down at him. You know, Jabba the Hutt was actually taller. If you look at him in Jabba's palace, he's taller than all of them as he sits there, this huge slug-like character. And so when they yeah, I'm going to talk about Jack Purvis afterwards. When they came to put Jabba into this, they couldn't have hands staring at his stomach. And so they made Jabba smaller and out of proportion to what he was in his palace. He was a smaller version of Jabba the Hutt. That's something else that people usually don't notice. I'm talking about Jack Purvis here, who was in the Praying Mantis, because he was the cabaret partner for Kenny Baker, who played R2-D2. And while we were filming, they couldn't do any cabaret. And so part of the deal was to include Jack in different characters. He wasn't as small as Kenny, but he was another little person. And so he played a lot of parts in Star Wars that nobody really recognizes him for. The Praying Mantis was something that had been sculpted by Chris Tucker. And Chris had gone and made the mechanisms for this. It was spring loaded, and you'll see there are these little wires that pull against the springs to pull the arms in, and then the springs let the arms out. It worked a lot like an angle poised lamp. Unfortunately, right behind Chewie and Obi-Wan, as he turned his head was and as they pulled the arms in, it would go clang, 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 clang. The springs would go clang, 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 clang. And so by the end of the first day, they had taken this character and shoved him around the back of the set, and we never saw him again. So that was another reason why he wasn't in the fight. Here you can see Jack and Kenny. You know, Jack was the chief Ugnaught. He was Tebow as well. And he was the chief Ugnaught and the chief Jawa. So he was a lot of different characters, and yet he's someone that no one ever talks about. I like to talk about the guys that no one talks about. This is kind of fun. It's just showing there's an extra crocodile in the Mos Eisley Cantina. You've got this crocodile head on the wall. It's sort of fun. So that was a wrap for the principal photography. Here you can see some of the designs that were done by Ron Cobb, which were completely different to everything that we had come up with. And often these are accredited to Rick Baker and his team, but they really, the credit needs to go to Ron Cobb, who was the designer behind Alien and lots of other movies, Judge Dredd as well, I think. You know, he was at the heart of a lot of these characters that people later on came to love, know and love. Ralph McQuarrie did do some designs. These were his designs. The one, I think this is, I forget the name of this character, but this one certainly made it, and so did this skull-like character over here. Here you can see them. They're in, it's like a three-car garage is where they filmed that, and all they did was built one alcove and shot it from one angle with some characters in, and then they moved the walls around and shot it from the other side. This was very low budget for what they were trying to achieve. No one ever expected that they were going to pull off the kind of movie that finally came out. You can see those characters here and the US crew that was doing that. A lot of these people went on to be better known later on. There's Phil Tippett in the middle there. My friend John Berg, I did a panel with him at Star Wars Celebration. There's also, you know, other people that went on. Rob Bottin was in this team as well, who later on did The Thing. What a great movie for creature effects that was. Anyway, you can see them sculpting those items up there. And these are the shots that we all know but they are literally just there. You can see John sitting here, ducking down behind Hammerhead. They just got the camera angle so you couldn't see him, down below. He's operating the head, and someone else is sitting there as the arms. They, obviously, these are all the shots that come from that. Sometimes they figure out who was in what just by looking at the footwear. They recognize these shoes and they know that John Berg was wearing them. So then they know John Berg was all of those characters. In England, we weren't allowed, for union reasons, as the creature builders, to actually operate them, which we would have loved to have done. But in the States, in a little triple garage where they didn't have the same union issues, the people who built these characters got to play them as well, which I'm sure was a lot of fun for them. When you're looking at this character, they wanted to light the alien eyes. They did it in a very technical fashion. They shoved a flashlight in the back of the head. These behind the scene photos are it's kind of fun to see that. So that is pretty much it. I've got, different photos that show you, like Muftak didn't get to wear any trousers because it didn't matter because we were only shooting the top half. Various elements, like that. A lot of these characters that you saw came from things that Rick Baker had made for other projects and then adapted for. This is a horror movie, and then there you see him again in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Different characters that you'll recognize. Hans from It's Alive as well. So Rob Bottin was, I think, 16 or something when they did this, and like I said, I admire his work a lot. And the band, which was added as an afterthought later on down the line. And in fact, I think somewhere I've got, I've got a thing of who was playing what instrument, but I don't seem to have it here. So that's it. That is the Mos Eisley Cantina. I'm back with you guys now, and if anybody's got any questions, now's the time to ask me.
Thanks, Nick. That was a wonderful presentation, and very insightful. There's a lot of bits and pieces that I have not heard of before. It is one of my favorite sequences of all of the Star Wars movies, is the original Mos Eisley Cantina. So thanks for that. That was just wonderful to hear your stories and memories, and to hear information that I personally have never heard before. It's just wonderful. So while we queue up some of the questions for you that I know a lot of our members will want to ask, I want to start off with one question. I remember when you spoke to us last, you talked about some of the pressures, particularly on Stuart Freeborn's team, and you guys working for him, particularly, with producing Yoda and getting it working, and the sitting around and trying to get things working, and then the pressure to do that. What was the difference then in terms of the original movie? I mean, I know it was a lower budget, but do you feel it was like a lot less pressure? Was it just kind of more fun to work on?
Yeah, we didn't have the same degree of pressure that we had on the second movie, because of the fact that on the second movie, on the first movie, the technology that Stuart was using was technology that he'd already used before on 2001: A Space Odyssey. So inventing something new was not as much of a challenge. It was a challenge for me because I hadn't done that stuff, but for Stuart, it was stuff that he kind of did well within his range. Really, the pressure was over time getting enough stuff together to fill that room. That was the main issue with the first movie. When we got to the second movie, we had a major character that was the world's first animatronic superstar, and no one had ever built an animatronic puppet before. And so the problem on that second movie was because they spent way too long trying to decide what Yoda would look like and didn't leave enough time for Stu to iron out the kinks in a mechanism that he couldn't start to build until we'd finished the sculpting. And so the first time, I think there was a lot of pressures on George Lucas. I've just finished editing a video that I'll be putting out in a few weeks about George Lucas and Alec Guinness, and memories of them from that time. And it is remarkable to note, if you take photos of George from the first movie through to episode 6, which is like a 6-year period, to actually see how much he ages in that time. He's really struggled to try and get the movie made. I think that's why the scripts were so different. The first draft, the second draft, the third draft of A New Hope, which wasn't called A New Hope, but was called The Star Wars, were completely unrecognizable. Darth Vader was an incidental character in the first draft, and he was like a stormtrooper in the second draft, and he didn't even become Luke's father until the third draft of Empire Strikes Back, because everything was in flux. No one really knew exactly where they were going or what they were going to lock down. He was just trying to get this thing up and running. He had gotten to ended up with 20th Century Fox, which was the absolute last resort for distributors, because 20th Century Fox were virtually bankrupt at that time, but all the other studios had turned it down. And Peter Beale, who was the executive in charge of production for Fox, says they turned it down for really good reasons. They turned it down because no one could figure out how they would make it in the first place. Everyone thought it was going to be a B movie, and so they looked at what income it might make and couldn't figure out how you would ever make this movie within a budget that would make a profit for what you could anticipate a science fiction movie was going to make. And so he struggled with all of that. There were issues. He was having, I'm not quite sure when the crack in his marriage took place, whether it was during this or after in post-production, but he was having to deal with that as well. I think there were, at the end, one of the quotes I remember on Empire Strikes Back was someone said to me that, he'd said the best thing about Star Wars was the fact that it meant he would never have to direct a movie again.
That's fantastic.
Very interesting. So I'm going to turn it over to Spencer now, who's been queuing up some of the questions from the members that are watching live tonight. Over to you, Spencer.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for sharing that presentation with us, Nick. That was absolutely fantastic to hear the tidbits about that, which leads into our first question from Mike. What's your favorite memory about working on the Star Wars?
You're talking about all 3 movies?
It could be all 3, or it could be the first, whatever's your favorite of.
Yeah, I mean, really, the first movie, I can't honestly say my favorite memory of working on the first Star Wars would be sitting with Alec Guinness, talking to him, because he was a legend, and I really greatly respected him. And in the video that I've just been editing, I talk about the fact that he was very approachable. Other actors have suggested to me that he wasn't like that with them. I can just say how he was with me. But for me, that was the highlight of that movie. Empire Strikes Back has my favorite memories in. It was nerve-wracking for me because I really stuck my neck out and risked my arm, saying I could do things that I'd never done before, just on the basis that I figured out I probably could. And we'd worked 60 hours in 3 days, basically 20 hours a day, slept on the floor underneath the bench. I would sleep for 2 hours and then work another 10 hours and then sleep for 2 hours and work another 10 hours. And we worked right through the night to try and get this backup Yoda together. And we finally finished it at 6 in the morning when it was due on set at 8 o'clock. And when I say we, that was me and one of the trainees, Bob. And we actually, we just sat and stared at this character that we'd made that we really could not change in any way. It now either worked or it didn't work. And it was half an hour before we actually had the courage to find out whether the eyes worked and whether it would blink and whether it would do the stuff, because we were afraid that, you know, I had promised that they'd be able to shoot on the back of the head and the ears would work. So I knew I was safe there. Even if the ears didn't work as well as I wanted them to, I knew they'd waggle around. So I knew that we were going to get that. But what I really wanted was to build a puppet that would do all the stuff that the prototype wasn't doing. And so I took it down to the set. This is a bit of a long story, but I took it down to the set and I gave it to Wendy Midner, who had joined our team from the Muppets and worked with us on all the Muppet bodies. And we came back to the workshop, but we were both too tired to go home. We couldn't drive home. Bob drove a motorbike. So if you work 60 hours straight, getting on a motorbike is not a wise thing to do. And for me, I didn't have as far to go as he did, but I knew I was too tired to drive home. So we went in a little storeroom at the back of the workshop and lay on the floor and went to sleep. And we woke up 22 hours later.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was the next day. And it was literally 3/4 of an hour before they would have had rushes for the day's filming of what on the puppet that we'd given them the day before. So awesome. We said, oh shit, let's we were never invited to go to rushes. Maybe Stuart could have gone to rushes, but it wasn't normal for people of our grade, if you like, in a team to go to rushes. But we thought, well, we'll just go sneak in. So we went down. There were only 3 people in the theater. It was George Lucas, the first assistant, and the cinematographer. And we snuck in and sat in the back row. And the scene that first came up was Yoda with his head in the box, throwing all the stuff over his shoulder. And I knew at that moment that the 13 years of struggling that I had gone in order to try to be recognized by people as being someone who was capable of doing things that were not ordinary, had just suddenly in a 3-day period come to fruition. And so there was a chill that went over me. There were tears in my eyes because 13 years of going against the grain of people saying, you know, don't you think you should maybe give this up? You know, you're not making a living at this. You know, maybe you should find another profession. It's not really quite working out for you, is it? Just suddenly there was this huge sense of relief because I knew that people would not look at me in the same way after that. So that's my favorite memory of Star Wars.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned your admiration and your enjoying having to work with Sir Alec Guinness. I don't know if you read Anthony Daniels' book, but he praised Alec and said that during filming of the first movie, he would quite often slip Anthony some of his per diem on the regular because he was worried that he was not able to eat at night, and he was the one who was getting the most per diem. So there's a lot of great stories about Alec, despite the fact that he was not originally excited about being in this space movie.
Right.
But then, was like the godfather to everybody, which is great considering the fact, where the character was, if you look at Obi-Wan Kenobi, overall. We have a question from Catherine. What was the most challenging character that you worked on?
Ever or in Star Wars?
Well, we say in Star Wars. Let's keep in that.
It was Yoda. I mean, like I say, no one had ever built a puppet that worked like that and made it a major character in a motion picture. That was why all the pressures were on Stuart. Stuart was trying to make a really fine mechanism that was, really very interestingly conceived, and which worked well when he finally got it working for episode 6. But, when you try to create something that is super fine, everything has to work and be in alignment in a fine sense. There was a picture recently that came out when they made the last episode 9 on the video that came out with that. There's a picture of me and Stu sitting looking at the inside of a Yoda skull, and I had sat with him and I saw what he was doing. When they gave me 3 days to build a backup, I knew there was no way in the world that I had the time to do that. And besides which, it wasn't. I felt that the problems that he was having was because he was trying to do too much in terms of fine, almost like clockmaking work. When you have a watch, everything has to be tiny and it has to be beautifully aligned. What I did instead was really very roughshod. I literally fixed all the cables directly into the skull and ran bike cables, because they were the only cables that were available within the hour. When I needed cables, they said, "Oh, there's a bike shop in town. Go buy me 10 bike cable housings and 10 cables, and we'll go see what we can make work out of that." So without doubt, that was the most taxing and stressful period, because I was so eager for people to know that I could do things, and yet I had never built an animatronic mechanism. I had just sat and watched what Stu had done, and what I was doing wasn't what Stu was doing. What I was doing was much simpler. I'm a big believer. If you get my book, you'll see I say, let simplicity be the essence of your genius, because the simpler something is, the less there is to break down. And so I, when I build something, I say, do we really need that? I mean, I want it to do more, but I want it to do more with less. I don't want to, as soon as you put anything that is radio controlled together, you're at the mercy of the batteries, and you're at the mercy of the chargers, and at the mercy of the power supply. And, there's that much more for things to go wrong than there is if you say, I'm going to run a cable and I'm going to move that with my finger.
Right.
So
we have a question from Dave, and he wants to know, what did you think of the Cantina scenes and characters in the sequel trilogies, which in his mind are an homage to the original scene?
Well, they are a homage to the original scene. There's no doubt about that. But I have to say, you know, I would have liked to have seen them doing something that was a bit more original than that. It was a bit, we have a number of things here. It's like every time we have a new Star Wars movie, we have to have a new Cantina style scene, whether it is in a club or whether it's in a casino. It's still basically every movie's got a scene full of aliens, and we've got to have a new robot. What was wrong with R2-D2? We all loved R2-D2. Okay, we loved BB-8 as well, but then he got abandoned too, so that they could maybe sell more toys for the next set of characters. So I think that often the commercial edge takes over and dictates a lot of the decisions that are made, because the movies did make, like the first two movies, they made about $4 billion grossed. Of course, they cost a lot, but they grossed about $4 billion. But in the same 2 years, the merchandising grossed $500 billion. The money is not in the movies. The money is in the merchandising.
It's always about the merchandising, where the real money for the movie is made. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, next question we had was from our member Scooby. He said, you mentioned that the union wouldn't allow you to act or manipulate the creatures on set. If you had been allowed to, is there a character or characters in hindsight you would have loved to have been part of in the film? And did these rules change in the future?
Yeah, it really depended. You know, the unions had a stranglehold on the way that movies are made, and they still do to a certain extent. If you're not a union member, you can't work in a film studio. But as time went by, people, you know, remember, this was really cutting edge stuff. No one had made these kinds of mechanical characters in movies before, and so the kind of puppets that they're talking about were very simplistic puppets. You know, they were a sculpted thing made out of rubber, stuffed on someone's arm, and the props department would operate them. We were trying to build something that was much more delicate and that had much more sophisticated movements. And yeah, I would really have liked to have been one of the operators on Yoda. I feel I would have had a lot to offer that. Later on other movies, I did operate puppets for lesser movies, things that I built. But you know, my career was very much an evolution, starting off making pretty people look prettier, and then specializing in making pretty people look pretty ugly, and then moving on to people in suits, and then moving on to puppets, and then moving on to animatronics, and then moving on to directing animatronics, and then moving on to designing you know, animatronic effect sequences, and in doing that, working with the script writer to rewrite the sequences and doing storyboards and various other things. That was what I was really working with, and you know, towards the end, I was directing and shooting the sequences as well. So I liked, and at that point in time, we didn't bring in any special puppeteers. The people, my crew that were making transformation figures were the people that were operating the stuff. And honestly, it makes sense, because then we know what we shouldn't do to break it. We know what it's capable of. If you built something to do X, Y, and Z, and you give it to someone else, and they keep trying to make it do A, B, and C, that, you know, they're never going to get the maximum out of it.
Absolutely. And could you tell us a little bit about your book?
My book, yeah. Well, here in the Caribbean, I've got this little museum that I use as a magnet to bring in a lot of people yeah, we do autographs to pay the bills and various things. We actually have some of the original scripts from the classic trilogy 2 that we do as displays and sell to pay the bills. COVID has been a nightmare for us, but hopefully we'll get out of that in the next year. I've got my fingers crossed for that anyway. My book, the principle of the museum, really, it's a registered non-profit to encourage youngsters to follow their dreams, be all they can be, and not to settle for less just because that's what all their friends do. You know, when I was 13, my teacher explained to me that I was an idiot and that I had all these crazy ideas that would never amount to anything, and that I needed to forget all of this stuff and take up woodwork and metalwork so that maybe one day, if I was lucky, I could be a foreman in a factory. Now, if I believed that, that's what I would have done. You know, we as youngsters are at the mercy of the advice that we are given by normal people, often teachers who have a vision of trying to channel kids to be useful cogs in society. We're actually discouraged from doing stuff that is extraordinary or stepping outside the box. You know, they say, oh, come on, you've got to be sensible now. You know, you're going to be going to work soon, you know, get rid of all this silly imagination stuff that you've got. So for me, I have to say, look, if I had believed that, I would never have made 63 movies and music videos. I would never have painted 400 paintings. I wouldn't have written 2 books and working on 2 more. I wouldn't be living in the Caribbean where people keep me in pina coladas. You can't allow your life to be limited by someone else's lack of imagination. And so that is the message that I give, and the book is really based on that. I found that I didn't set out to have a philosophy. I set out to make a living and pay the bills while I was in the Caribbean. I had art galleries, but people came and asked me about the movies, and they asked me about other stuff. And really the answers that I gave them, I realized were something of a philosophy. And every time I had a conversation with someone and a particular topic came up, I'd think, yeah, I should really write that down. I never really thought about that. So I would write it down. And eventually I had pages and pages and pages and pages of things that I'd written down while I was talking to youngsters and other stuff. And I compiled those into my little book of big ideas, which is called the Do or Do Not Outlook. That's available on, you can order it through Barnes & Noble, or it's available on Amazon. But I encourage people to, if they want it without an autograph, to connect with me for it, because when an author sells a book, he makes about 50 cents out of it. When you buy it from me directly, our museum makes half the cost of the book, and that's a huge difference. And I have a bunch of books in the US right now, so someone will ship them out for me if you want to order them from me direct. The book is 77 steps on how to get from wherever you are to wherever it is you're trying to go. And someone reviewed the book and said, I read this and I thought maybe this guy doesn't really have a handle on reality. And then I read the bit at the back that explained how he went from low-income housing, basically being in the projects, to rubbing shoulders with Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. And how I use those principles, all the principles that I have in there, I later on explain really how they were useful and how they moved me from point A to point B. And so it's a manual, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about the entertainment industry or you're talking about being an astronaut. It's all about staying on track. It's all about moving on a daily basis towards your goal. And it's all about keeping going until you succeed. Because as I say, the people who fail are the people who gave up.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you there.
Very interesting title to the book. I like that. So we're almost out of time, Nick. So we're going to wrap things up, which we'll do in a second. But I think I have the privilege of asking the last question. Who shot first, Han or Greedo?
Well, you know, Greedo didn't shoot at all.
I thought that would be.
So that should be the answer right there, right? Greedo didn't even get a shot off. They messed around with the film in different versions and had a shot fired. But you know, at the time, not only did Greedo not shoot, but Han shot him under the table.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny, when I met Paul Blake a number of years ago at a small con over here, I actually asked him to write on my Funko Pop, "I shot first." And he said to me, "Well, you know, that's not true." I was like, "Well, have you watched the special editions?" And he was like, "Yeah, touche there. But I didn't shoot first, but I'll write it down anyway."
I remember, I was 8 years old, and I remember the original movie, the original format. And yes, of course, Han shot him under the table. But having listened to your presentation this evening, Nick, there's no way that Greedo could have shot him with those hands and those fingers. It's just
no, impossible. You're right. That's right. It was impossible.
Washing up gloves.
Yeah.
So one thing before we wrap up, Nick, I know we've just scratched the surface tonight with your work and you know, your history with movies generally, not just Star Wars. So people want to find out a little bit more about you and your work. Do you have a website that you can drive people towards so they can learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah, we first started putting up websites in the 90s. In fact, in 1996, we were named #1 in the world for movie special effects by the BBC in London. But of course, that website's, I think that's long gone now. There's still a few of those files around. We've got something like 50,000 files online and don't have a chance to try and sort them out. The way I would tell people, you want the biography, just go to nickmaley.com. And you will have, you know, whatever you want there. It tells the whole story from being a little kid to being a sailor and an artist and lots of other things too. You want to find me and join our digital family. You can do that on Facebook. I'm Nick Maley number something, but trust me, if you put Nick Maley in, I'm going to come up. You'll find me. On YouTube, we're putting videos most weeks there. Once again, just go to YouTube, put in Nick Maley, you'll find me. The channel is actually Nick Maley, That Yoda Guy. But I also would like to encourage people, if they like the message that I've just been telling you about, what our foundation is about. We've really struggled very, very hard through this period. We're in a little island that is totally dependent on tourism. And so for 20 months, we laid off all the staff. And have been unable to pay any wages, and we still have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars every month on rent and other stuff. We're just beginning to get a few ships coming back now. So if you would like to, if your heart is charitable enough to come and join us, we have a Patreon site too. It's Patreon/FYSF, because our foundation is known internationally as the Follow Your Star Foundation. So it's the first letter of each one. And there, you know, for $2.50 a month, you can help us in our efforts to encourage kids to live extraordinary lives, and adults too. I've had people who came through who ended up working on Rogue One. I had a guy who was in his 50s. I encouraged him to go back to school and become a doctor. He came back 6 years later when he was almost 60 as a psychiatrist. You know, there is no reason why people can't change their life, whatever point they're in. It's just a matter of believing in yourself and believing that you can do it and being determined to see it through. And so if that resonates with you, please go to patreon.com, add FYSF, and make a little donation each month. And the people there are I call them my inside circle, because I share with them things that I don't share elsewhere, things on a more personal level, and they get to see all the videos before anybody else. So
that's wonderful. Thank you, Nick. And again, on behalf of Spencer, myself, and all of our members, thank you for spending so much time this evening. Wonderful presentation, wonderful insight into, specifically the Mos Eisley Cantina creatures. It's been wonderful. So before we wrap things up, Spencer, we just want to kind of go through a quick summary of the forthcoming Star Wars Virtual Cantina speaker series. As I mentioned earlier on, next week we have C. Andrew Nelson, who was employed by ILM and Lucasfilm in various capacities. Andrew will be joining us soon. Then towards the last week of this month of November, we have Craig Miller, who was the Director of Fan Relations, joining us to talk about his work in the Star Wars universe. And then finally, at the beginning of December, we have Paul Hirsch. Paul will be joining us to talk about his work in co-editing Star Wars and editing The Empire Strikes Back. So we look forward to those speakers, and I'm sure they'll be as wonderful as Nick has been with his presentation this evening. So I think that's all from me. Over to you, Spencer.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to say thank you very much for coming back to the Virtual Cantina to talk with us tonight, Nick. I'm glad we were able to work through all the technical difficulties and have an absolutely fantastic presentation tonight. So thank you so much for that. Any last words before we close out, Nick?
Not really. I mean, I just, once again, my message to everybody is to believe in yourself and believe in your impossible dream. One of my companies is called Impossible Dreams Limited. And, I have a quote that is on the wall in the museum. It says, if you don't believe in your impossible dream, you're the one who guarantees it won't come true. And that really is my message in a nutshell. So, and that's part of the reasons why I say, hey, come and support us and help us help someone else make their dream come true.
Words to live by, and it's a great way to end up tonight. Just a reminder, on Tuesday, we have our Life Day celebration with the Skywalking Through Neverland crew, and we start our March countdown to the Book of Boba Fett, which starts next week. We're going to be watching Attack of the Clones on the Virtual Cantina Watch Along. So from John, from our guest Nick, and from Dave behind controls, this is Spencer saying, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
It has been.